All right. So I am with Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation. And if you're not familiar with the Shoreline Erosion Advisory Service, we've been around for about 40 years. We provide science-based technical assistance on environmentally sound shoreline management alternatives to both private property owners as well as public land management agencies like localities or state federal agencies. We work on tidal shorelines as well as non-tidal stream banks and impoundments. We go out to an individual's property and we take a look at their erosion concern and help them understand what may be causing it. We talk about solutions that are applicable to their particular situation. We follow that up with a written advisory report with those recommendations on solutions. We usually attach lists of contractors and example schematics of the shoreline solution that they could implement on their property. If they decide to move forward, we can help their contractor with the designs and plans. We can look at those, comment on them, and make them better. With the intent of just another set of eyes helps make that design a better design for the homeowner or the land manager. And then we can also do construction inspections for that property owner to help them ensure that they get what's in their design, what's in their permit. Sometimes, particularly residential homeowners might not really understand what their contractor's doing or what's even in their permit. And we provide guidance on financial incentives, most specifically on living shorelines. And best of all to our property owners is that this is all no cost to them. So that's what we do. That's what we've done for 40 plus years, is work with private property owners and agencies on their eroding shorelines. So let's talk about living shorelines. Many of you on this call are probably familiar with this, but living shorelines are a piece of a spectrum for what shoreline property owners can implement if they have an erosion concern. We got green solutions and some harder gray solutions. Living shorelines are in and of themselves a spectrum and can be as simple as, adding additional marsh grass or something more complicated with a riprap sill off shore, or even breakwaters with dune and beach grass planted behind it. So living shorelines have that living component to it. And again, many of us probably are aware that living shorelines bring a whole host of ecosystem services and co-benefits beyond protection of property and reduction of erosion concerns. They provide water quality benefits by trapping that sediment and attached nutrients. They provide all kinds of habitat for wildlife and species and others, and they help reduce storm surge, and they have coastal resiliency benefits. So there's a lot of benefits there. So what's driving living shoreline implementation across Virginia? There's several things that are pushing that. If you're not aware, you probably should be aware that VMRC, Virginia Marine Resources Commission, the state regulator, has changed the rules on implementing shoreline solutions in Virginia due to General Assembly legislation last year. And so now living shorelines are kind of the de facto permitting option. So you can still, legally do a revetment or a bulkhead if those are appropriate, but living shorelines have to be the first option, and a homeowner would have to demonstrate that a living shoreline is not appropriate in order for them to implement something else like a revetment or a bulkhead or whatnot. We also are probably all aware of the Chesapeake Bay TMDL Watershed Implementation Plan. There's goals in there for shoreline stabilization, which include living shorelines. Additionally, the state lands WIP, which was recently implemented or released, has goals in there for shoreline management on state-owned properties. And then we have the Coastal Resiliency Master Plan and the new Community Flood Preparedness Fund. Those have been going on for a while. And the the greenhouse gas funding for flood protection does have some focus on living shorelines and nature-based solutions. I just saw a presentation yesterday in the George Washington Regional Commission area about the Coastal Resiliency Master Plan. There's a lot of work that's being done, and they're soliciting a lot of input, and so there's push for nature-based solutions in that that venue and forum there. So there's a lot of things pushing living shorelines here in Virginia. Virginia has also already implemented several programmatic and financial incentive approaches to help push living shorelines. There's a lot of loan programs and cost share programs, both for residential homeowners as well as agricultural producers. Through DCR and the local stormwater conservation districts, we can provide cost share and low interest loans through DEQ to ag producers on cropland or livestock areas, or even silviculture land if it's an active timber operation. So there's a lot of programs in place to help push living shorelines. So you might ask, where are we then on living shoreline implementation? So let's look at the TMDL watershed implementation plan. So the goals in the WIP for shoreline management are about 500,000 linear feet of new shoreline management between 2008 and up until 2025. That's the numeric goal, and you can see there's some basin specific breakouts there. Rappahannock almost has the second, it has the second highest their goal, 25 miles or so. The one thing to remember about the WIP is that it's not just these numeric goals, but there are programmatic narrative goals in there, and a lot of them do cross-pollinate with living shorelines, reporting living shorelines and other BMPs, as well as what we just talked about with Coastal Resiliency Master Plan and all those cost share programs. And so there's some cross-pollination here on these narratives with the numeric goal for shoreline management. So over the past 4 years or so, SEAS has reported on almost 1,200 sites, shoreline management sites, and reported these to EPA for the WIP. We've done a lot of work to document these sites that have mostly been installed on private property with those private property owners' funds, and how that breaks out. You can see here that overall, it gets us really close to about 50%, just under 50% of that goal. And so we got 4 years or so here to get to that 500,000 linear feet goal. We have many hundreds more sites that we know we still need to document that have already been implemented, most of which are living shorelines that have new marsh grass planted that we've got to get out there in the field and physically verify. I don't think those are going to get us all the way to this 500,000 linear foot goal. And so how do we get here? How do we close that gap with living shorelines for the WIP in the next 4 years? And we hope that this new grant that we've just received is going to help us with that. We just received a NIFWIF grant, National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, through their innovative nutrient sediment reduction grant program. We're really pleased and happy to get it. This is actually our second year to apply. We didn't get it the first year, and so we tweaked some things, and we're really pleased to have been awarded this grant this year. It's a $1 million grant. It's a 3-year grant now through the middle of 2024. And we've got 4 objectives with this grant. So we want to grow and enhance existing partnerships that are working on living shoreline implementation, like the Rappahannock River Roundtable, like the Rappahannock River Basin Commission and this technical committee talking about living shorelines, and others all across rural coastal Virginia. We want to develop a cache of shovel-ready living shoreline projects that have the engineering designs completed and ready to go, so that the variety of partners can pick that design up and say, okay, let's get the permit and let's apply for some construction funds. We've found that in a lot of situations, applying for a grant or some other financial incentive program, it's a barrier not to have that plan done already. That helps you get a good cost estimate. It helps the funders know what you're trying to do. And so we want to get some plans and designs done and ready to go in this cache of shovel-ready projects. We also want to provide some funding to construct new living shorelines through this project on socially vulnerable sites. We've left the definition of that kind of vague intentionally for the purpose of each regional group to feel comfortable with how that may be defined in their area. And then, of course, we want to continue that documentation. Like I said, we've got several hundred more sites at least that we've got to verify. And again, through this 3-year project, there's going to be a lot more living shorelines that others are working on that we need to document and get turned in for those WIP goals. So rural coastal Virginia does actually have a statutory definition in Virginia, and it's the 12 county service area of the Northern Neck PDC, Middle Peninsula PDC, and Eastern Shore, the Accomack Northampton PDC. And so we've got 12 counties here that we're focusing in on this work plan, the scope of work that crosses, of course, the Potomac, Rappahannock, York, and the Eastern Shore basins. So it's a fairly large geographic area. So let's talk a little bit in detail about these 4 objectives. So for this partnership enhancement piece, like I said, we want to work with groups that are already working on living shorelines and help to focus that effort to get us to that 2025 WIP goal. And one of the ways we think that we can help with that is if we can have some type of mutually agreed strategic plan. So it's one thing to have the WIP say our goal is 500,000 linear feet, but how are we actually going to get there? What steps are we actually going to take? What mutually agreed programs can we all get behind and support? Like I said, a lot of entities have done a lot of work on living shorelines in rural coastal Virginia, but trying to target that and focus that and get everybody behind that same initiative is kind of the intent of this strategic plan. And we don't envision anything large or cumbersome, just some things that we can all mutually agree on and put down on paper to commit to. And to facilitate that discussion, to get us to that strategic plan, there's a list of things that have come up in discussions that we've been involved in over the past couple of years that we think merit that discussion and work on strategizing to implement them. How do we use all these existing financial incentive programs? How do we institutionalize those programs and combine them for the joint benefit of property owners? Do we need better outreach and social marketing campaigns targeted towards homeowners and others to implement living shorelines? We've heard that, because living shorelines have that living piece, homeowners and property owners that install them, they do need to do some monitoring to ensure that they remain a successful solution. Oftentimes, financial incentive programs like VCAP, Virginia Conservation Assistance Program, or even the Agricultural Cost Share Program through DCR, the homeowners and the ag producers sign on that dotted line for a 10, 15-year commitment to keep that living shoreline in place and keep it functioning properly. And so, perhaps we should provide those property owners with a tool to monitor things that they can specifically look at to help keep that living shoreline successful. And then in those narrative WIP goals, there was one about supporting the growth of private sector native plant nurseries. So if you read that in the WIP, it's phrased around the context of stormwater management and native plants for stormwater BMPs, but I think we can talk about that here from the context of living shorelines. And there's been some recent discussion about the availability of new marsh grass from nurseries, or the limited availability, I should say, of that marsh grass from nurseries to plant at living shoreline projects, particularly the larger living shoreline projects. And so if we can find a way to help support some type of a nursery in rural coastal Virginia that would grow these plants out for living shoreline projects, I think that would be very forward thinking for this group in rural coastal Virginia and for the WIP. We want to use, for this partnership piece, we want to use existing forums. We don't want to create something new. We don't need a new work group. Everybody's busy. We've all got our own things to accomplish. And so we want to use these existing forums that have been around for years, decades in many situations, and just work through those groups. So primarily the roundtables, Rappahannock, Potomac, York, and Eastern Shore watershed roundtables. The 4 soil and water conservation districts and the 3 PDCs are very critical to our scope of work. One of the other objectives is the field verification. So we do want to continue verifying all those BMPs that are out there getting implemented on the shoreline. We found that logistically, the best way to do that is get out on a boat. And so, it's one thing to track down all the property owners and call them and get permission to come out and look at their shoreline solution. It's a lot easier just to get on the boat and go up the creek and look at all the spots that we've got on a map. And so we're going to use the boats of several of our partners, as well as try and lease a boat and get us out there to verify several hundred sites for the next 3 years. A big portion of the project, of the budget, about a fifth of the budget, is for this cache of shovel-ready living shoreline designs. So we're going to work with Scott Hardaway at VIMS. We're going to do about 12 designs, and we see them falling out in 3 categories: socially vulnerable residential areas, agricultural or timbered properties, and other priority sites. And those other priorities might be locality-owned park, state-owned wildlife management area, or federal property. We could do a design, at Dahlgren or on the Potomac, or the Rappahannock Wildlife Refuge even would be appropriate for that other priority. So based on that geographic scope of the 4 basins and these 3 categories of designs, we've got funding to do 12 designs. We see them being on larger wave energy sites and the medium to higher wave energy sites. Doesn't have to be, but it's kind of how we see it falling out. So, that might be 1 or 2 of each category type in each geographic area. Doesn't have to be. We don't have it broken out that way. There's no commitment to evenly disperse that, but to really involve all of our partners across that geographic scope, we want to spread these designs out. And so this is, in addition to that strategic plan and the discussion with the partners about that, this is another key input piece that we need to rely on our partners for, is suggestions and recommendations and priorities for doing these designs. So if there are areas that you're aware of that either there's already been discussion, but the property owners don't know how to proceed, or they're ready to go, they just don't have the money to do a design, let me know. Reach out and let me know about those priorities, and we can put them on a list and we can talk about them, so we can get Scott and his group out there to do those designs over the next 3 years. We really need input on this piece. The largest chunk of money is for construction. Remember, it's $1 million grant, so $625,000 to construct new living shorelines. This construction money must be in socially vulnerable residential areas, and we, in the scope of work, how we envisioned it is that VCAP, through the Stormwater Conservation Districts, has been very productive in funding living shorelines on small individual residential properties. And so we see this funding perhaps playing a role in that medium to higher wave energy environments where VCAP funding is not eligible. They restrict it to this lower wave energy shorelines. And so we think that if we can look at socially vulnerable residential areas across multiple parcels, multiple property owners, to design a larger living shoreline that provides multiple benefits across the area. The goal is just under 1,400 new linear feet of living shoreline. If that ends up being 2 or 4 living shorelines, that's fine. And of course, being a grant-funded project, there is some post-construction monitoring requirements. So all those designs that we want Scott to work on, we want to take at least 2 or 3 of them to this construction phase in this socially vulnerable residential area. And so we probably are going to get Scott to do these designs first, so we can move to construction in like year 2 of this 3-year project. so we can meet those post-construction monitoring requirements. So again, if there's an area that kind of fits the bill of a socially vulnerable residential area, and it's a larger area, not just one property owner, provides benefits to a neighborhood or community or several residences, we need to know about it. Our scope of work did have a short list of conceptual sites and areas that we provided to NIFWIF. They weren't committed to those sites. It was just for discussion in the proposal. I don't think I put that map in here, but like, for example, one area was the Simonson area and down the lower Rappahannock. There's been a lot of living shoreline work in that area, but there could be more. You might be asking how we might define socially vulnerable. What we envisioned and told NIFWIF we would do is, there's a lot of tools out there that have looked at this and analyzed data. And so if we can get our list of sites that we want to look at, we want to use several existing tools and run the sites through those tools, and then just get some relative comparisons of that social vulnerability, and then decide which ones to move to design and construction. And so NIFWIF has a tool, if you're not aware of it, regarding coastal resiliency. They developed it for a different grant program, but it has applicability here in the Chesapeake and Virginia. The CDC has a social vulnerability index, which connects human health impacts and natural disasters. There's a good portal to that data on the Virginia Public Access Project website. And then VIMS, who manages the Adapt VA website. If you're not familiar with that one, it's got a lot of information on it regarding coastal resiliency, shoreline management, living shoreline priorities. It has a lot of data on it. And so if we can take our sites and run them through these tools just to get some relative comparison. On an aside, yesterday, that presentation I saw in the George Washington Regional Commission area about the Coastal Resiliency Master Plan, and man, if you haven't seen that yet or been involved in that process, they've done some very detailed analysis of these exact things, of social vulnerability and coastal flooding impacts. And I think they've taken that CDC data and really tunneled down into it, to that Census Bureau block level data. And they've got some really interesting data products, but I don't think those are going to be publicly available and released until like November. And so, there's just a timing issue between that project and ours, but when it's out there, it's going to be some really interesting analysis of this exact same thing that we're talking about here. So that's what I've got. That's the overview of our project. Like I said, it's a 3-year project. We've got quite a few objectives. We really need partners to help us, one, develop that list of project sites that we can do designs on, help us prioritize those, and take them to the design phase, and then take at least 2 or 3 of those socially vulnerable ones to that construction phase. So if you've got any input on sites like that, be very appreciated. And like I said, we want to do construction in year 2, so we do need to get Scott rolling on some designs here at the beginning, particularly the socially vulnerable sites. And then the other piece is that strategic plan, the partnership enhancement piece. That's going to be 12 to 18 months, I think, of back and forth between all the groups, just to get some mutually agreed objectives there. So that's going to take some input as well. We need that input on that one, but that's going to take a little bit longer, I think, to get us through that process. Questions?
Aaron, thank you very much. Have you got a few minutes for some questions?
Absolutely.
Okay, I got a note here from David Nunley, who was having trouble trying to get this into the chat, saying the town of Port Royal has expressed an interest in a living shoreline project for their entire shorefront.
Okay.
multiple property owners, and could be a great demonstration project. So you might want to reach out to the town, or even reach out to David first. And David, feel free to come off mute and add some more to that if you want, or not. Okay. Question.
Can you hear me?
There you go. Got it.
Yeah, sorry for that. I'm between the computer and the phone, so I got it. You know, on this idea, we had explored this a few years ago. And unfortunately, the consultant that was working with the project, they came back and simply said, well, we don't see the erosion problem being that bad. They just, and that pretty much killed it. You know, there was no consideration of the value of a demonstration project, which I think that location would be awesome. I mean, the thousands of cars that come across the bridge every day, you could see the whole town front of Port Royal. I think it would be a huge success in a demonstration project, but it would take a lot of contributions to make it happen. You know, the town of Port Royal is struggling to keep their head above water. But we can talk more, but I think it would be a great site.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. I think that, you know, historically, shoreline management in Virginia, you know, the focus is on erosion and protecting infrastructure from historic erosion, and that's still the primary focus of when you look at a permit application. You got to have an eroding shoreline really to qualify really for some of these shoreline solutions. But I think that the issue of sea level rise and the changing storm surge frequencies, and the concept of coastal resiliency, I think the changing nature of why we would do a living shoreline or some other shoreline solution doesn't only have to be about historic past erosion rates anymore. And if you look at that coastal resiliency master plan, I think some of their data products and outcomes look at that exact thing. They're projecting future sea level rise and impacts to areas and prioritizing projects based on that. And so even if that area that you described has low to no historic erosion, it still might be a good site, like you said, to design something on and look at. So yeah.
Other questions for Aaron?
Yeah, I was wondering if, Aaron, if you have heard anything from the community of Portobago Bay in the last month or two. I know they have been going back and forth. They have a permit from VMRC for a very unique style living shoreline. There's been a lot of debate back and forth about how it could be improved. I know they were talking with Mike a little bit, so it might not be your project. Just wondering if there's been if they have contacted you.
Not me. I'll have to talk to Mike. He did, for those on there, there's two of us in the Shoreline Erosion Advisory Service. There's me and Mike Van Lanningham, and yeah, he may have had discussions. Not me. I have not. But I'll ask him.
Thanks.
Other questions? I've got one for you, Aaron, if nobody else does. In the discussions in Congress about infrastructure and the stormwater elements, any idea whether this kind of approach will be eligible for those kind of dollars?
Yeah, I think there's seen a lot of stuff that natural and nature-based features are getting prioritized in a lot of federal funding programs, both existing and new. I mean, the largest one that many of us on here are aware of recently came out is FEMA's new BRIC program, building resilient infrastructure in communities or something like that. And I know that that program, at least they said up front that they would prioritize natural and nature-based projects for implementation. Another one that my understanding is either, I think it's in the funding bills for this next fiscal year, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. I think they call it Chesapeake Wilds. And so again, the focus there, of course, is on fish and wildlife resources, but connected to green infrastructure, including things like living shorelines. And so, yeah, absolutely. Congress and many federal agencies are taking a new look at these types of approaches, prioritizing them.
Okay. Thank you. Other questions for Aaron before he has to make a strategic withdrawal?
Eldon, I was just going to say, we're still trying to find ways to fill that gap between the public funding that's available and making that funding available to private residents. I think that's something that DCRCs is doing with that grant project, and really glad to hear that update, Aaron, and hopefully we can make some more impact. But there's a lot of funding rolling around right now, and not a lot of it's available for private property owners.
Right.
So that was a perfect pitch, John. And I just have a prompt for Aaron. With the localities and PDCs represented here, the Stormwater Local Assistance Fund is a state grant program. And Aaron, in your experience, is that something that a locality could apply for on behalf of a local landowner or a group of local landowners?
That's a good question. I don't know if SLAF monies can be spent actually on private property. I don't know. Some of those state programs have restrictions like that. I don't know the answer to that question, but SLAF is definitely an appropriate funding mechanism for a living shoreline. But yeah, as far as putting it on private property, I don't know that particular program's requirements.
My understanding is they would need to have a use agreement just similar to the soil and water district contracts, but all those localities out there, if you have your own properties or several landowners looking for shorelines, only localities and PDCs are eligible for SLAF applications. And, through this grant, Aaron, I assume you'd be able to help with SLAF applications.
Yeah,
and
I think so. Yeah.
The roundtable is also available to help with SLAF applications for those folks interested. And
so many of these financial incentive programs, they do say that design is eligible, in the costs and the reimbursement amounts for the grant or whatnot. But like I said earlier, it's difficult sometimes to get a good budget, a good grant proposal, a good application if you don't already have that design. So yeah, I think that if there's a locality that has a really good site on their own, with or without neighboring private properties, yeah, we could do a design here and structure it to use SLAF for construction, get the design done through this. I think that'd be a good example. I do know that SLAF has historically been used for, stream restoration work and other stormwater type management. And so an existing SLAF project that's a living shoreline, I don't know, there may be one that I can think of or have heard of. So this would be a new use of that funding. It's eligible, but I just think it hasn't been used in the past.
Yeah, this is Dave. I wanted to just say I took a quick look at the information that's readily available on the web on SLAF. Obviously, the funding itself goes directly and only to local governments. It's not clear to me whether that can be used on private property if the local government, had an agreement that it fit into the local jurisdiction's needs. I can look into that though and let you know what I find out.
Great.
Thanks, Dave. Other questions for Aaron?
Eldon, can
Yes.
you hear me?
Yes.
This is David Nunley. On the subject of the ongoing maintenance of the living shorelines, in my experience historically, years ago, that was one of the, I guess, resistance to implementing living shorelines. Property owners saw this as a constant maintenance type thing, and particularly in replanting. Say there was a loss and you had to replant. Years ago, most property owners would opt towards the harder structures, just with the belief that there's less maintenance. we can argue that, long term, short term, that sort of thing. But as the living shoreline moves forward, we have more of these. I'm wondering if maybe a group like Friends of the Rappahannock could have a program that seasonally could revisit some of these sites and offer the homeowner a replanting if necessary, or to augment their planning. Something to help the property owners with that ongoing maintenance. Just a suggestion. I don't know what the need is, but I kind of could see that as being one more thing to help in the implementation.
Let Brian
Dave.
address that specifically, but I will say before that topic is right on the money, because other basins are having that exact same discussion. So the James River Association is got some grant money to do that exact thing in their basin.
I'll say one thing and then point to my colleague John Bateman. We plant thousands, hundreds of thousands of trees in partnership with soil and water districts and Department of Forestry for landowners, and those have contracts, 10 or 15-year contracts. And when oftentimes we're the ones who go out and replant those 20 trees or 50 trees because of a drought or a flood year. And we do that with volunteers. People love going and replanting trees on Arbor Day, something like that. And there's meager grant funds available to help with that. Or sometimes the landowners are like, here's $50. Can you guys just go do it? And we do not have a professional program to do that across the state for everybody who needs it. However, we do that. And on living shorelines, I think we've probably installed 10 or 15 total. If somebody called us and said, hey, man, all of our grass has died or 50% of our grass has died, can you come back out? If we had, these grasses are 85 cents a plug when you buy them in bulk, if you can find them. So it's not going to break the bank to go out and plant 100 plugs with a high school group or a 4-H group or something like that. And if people called us and all of a sudden there's a demand, we would probably be able to fulfill some of that in the Rappahannock watershed. We also, over the last 5 or so years, have teamed up with multiple entities to host landscape contractor training to get them a little more familiarized with the living shorelines such that they could be the ones that get called. The same way if somebody's terrible non-native shrubs in their front yard dies, their boxwoods dies, somebody's got to come and replant those. It's no different, in my opinion, just having that educated workforce. And I will say that Northern Neck Planning District had a NIFWIF grant for living shorelines, and they wrote some post-project maintenance into it. And John, you want to talk about that foresight?
Right. And Brian, you really, Friends of the Rappahannock is kind of filling a gap here in the Northern Neck and really building foundations. And that's what we ultimately want to do. We want to make sure the industries that are these resilience industries, which is what they really are, have the ability and the means to operate and do this type of maintenance. So for one, we need more native plants, as Brian alluded to. We need our nurseries here in the Northern Neck to grow these native plants, to grow these grasses so that they can be cheaper, and we can have those jobs maintained right here in our region. Also, we need to have local landscapers get educated, whether it's through the Chesapeake Bay Landscape Professional Program or through some other workshop that we've held numerous of, to do this maintenance while they're out taking care of the yard and the other issues on these properties. They can be doing shoreline maintenance. And so if we can drive down the cost and we can have more operators, we can have more people and make it easier for property owners to maintain their living shorelines. And we did build in post maintenance funds because, as you know, I mean, you're going to have mortality, and that's just going to happen no matter what you do. So a project, Brian brings up a good point. If you're going to have a living shoreline project, you need to build in that maintenance over at least the first couple of seasons to make sure you can go back in there. Otherwise, you're kind of, in my mind, you're kind of wasting your time. You're not doing your due diligence.
With a couple of references that have been made to workforce, are there special skills that need to be trained for the folks that are doing that work, or is it something that's pretty easy to learn?
Well, you can drive around to any locality in Virginia and find trees that have that volcano of mulch around it. And those are professionals, and that's wrong. And it's not doing good for the tree. And there's a right way to do it. You go downtown Fredericksburg and find a place where Ann Little personally supervised the planting of a tree, and you're going to have a very healthy tree. Same thing with all these plants that are being installed. There's a good way, a best way, and a very wrong way to do it. And we were just out at a project at the Tides Inn in Lancaster County with the president of Environmental Concern, one of the better nurseries that provides living shoreline plants. And she taught the volunteers, our professional staff who are CBLPs, and the whole landscape contractor team how to correctly plant her plants to maximize their survival. And if I was in charge of teaching them, I would have taught them wrong. So it's very easy. You just have to listen to it once, and they're happy to teach. And I think Wetlands Watch is coming up with a shoreline specific, living shoreline specific Chesapeake Bay landscape professional training, probably in conjunction with Aaron and his grant. That and you know, the roundtable and PDCs Aaron mentioned will have a hand in all of that, I imagine.
Eldon, to answer your question, I mean, it does seem simple that any landscaper could go out there and do that, but there are best practices that should be adhered to. So it's a matter of making sure that those businesses are utilizing those best practices. And there's a two-pronged approach to that. One is making sure they're educated and have the proper information on how to do it so they know what those best management practices are. The other is making the consumer comfortable with who they've hired to do their landscaping, knowing that they're going to utilize best management practices. I think every property owner, when they hire a landscaper, expects them to use those best management practices. So certification programs have that effect where a business can go through the certification, have that trust with the consumer. And that's why I've pressed our local workforce development organizations through the Rappahannock Community College to embrace the Chesapeake Bay Landscape Professional Program. And they're starting to kind of pay attention a little bit, but it's kind of a chicken and an egg situation where they have to know that they're going to have the students to go through that certification process before they can actually have it. So I've been in touch with Shireen Hughes and Dr. Kennedy at the community college about that.
All right. John, I'm not going to take people's time here, but I'd like to talk to you more about that. I do a fair amount of interacting with the community college workforce, wearing a different hat. And if it can be classified as a high demand job, it's eligible for G3 and it's free. You know, the state picks up the tuition cost, the fee cost. So anyway, different topic, but let's talk more about that offline. Any more questions for Aaron? Aaron, any closing comments?
You know, we just need everybody's thoughts and input. So if additional sites come to mind next few weeks, if you have any thoughts on the strategic plan, like I said, that's going to take a little bit longer for us to work on and get something written down. But right now, I think any ideas on sites to do these designs and constructions is where we're looking at for now, right now, in the immediate. So appreciate your time.
Great. Hey,
this
thank
group's
you.
work.
Thank you very, very much.
Hey, Aaron, just quick thought, you and I can follow up separately on this, but DQ just recently formed an Office of Environmental Justice, Equity, and whatever it is, full name. And their director got a ton of experience in that field. So with your social vulnerability goals and need to fold that in, I think DEQ would want to be helpful, and we can talk on that separately.
Great, excellent, appreciate that.
Excellent. And Aaron, good luck with your next meeting. I know you're jumping off of this one and on to another one. We will talk more about this, and I'd like to talk to you about, you know, we kind of sharpen the presentation for a presentation of the commission at the December meeting. The commission doesn't generally get more than 20 minutes for a topic. We don't get to put 50, 60 minutes in like we do in this committee. But we'll talk more between now and then. And everybody put on your thinking caps. You got project sites or ideas like David Nunley and Port Royal, pass them along. With that, Mr. Hoffman, let's talk about upcoming symposium.
Great. I just want to also testify that Aaron and his colleagues at SEAS are an invaluable resource, and we're actually later today installing 2 living shoreline projects in Urbana Creek that were originally the landowners had free shoreline assessments provided by Aaron and his colleague Mike Van Landingham. And since this body here, the TAC, spans the entire watershed, I will say that Aaron and his Mike Van Landingham services apply to stream bank erosion as well as tidal shoreline erosion, and their free landowner assessments are available anywhere. And Aaron can chime in and correct me, but he confirmed that for me. So Culpeper County, Fauquier County, they will go out and look at landowner stream bank erosion issues and maybe provide recommendations and an assessment there. And I just provided Aaron's contact info to Fauquier County for them to pass out to landowners. Anyway, the best way to get Aaron more resources is to have them have too many calls that they can't accommodate them, so the state gives them more money for a third person.
Exactly.
Great. So very briefly, the Rappahannock River Roundtable has received funding through the Department of Forestry's Urban and Community Forestry Grant Program and the Department of Environmental Quality and some private foundations to host and facilitate a Rappahannock River Symposium. I have posted on the Roundtable's Facebook page to save the date. The majority, if not everyone on this TAC, as well as anybody Eldon and the Roundtable Advisory Group recommends, will get a postcard, save the date. That is September 8th in Fredericksburg, Virginia. And we now have a venue. It's at the it's at the old Silk Mills new addition building. It's right on Princess Anne Street. It has rooftop views of the river, and it's going to provide us good Wi-Fi as well as concurrent presentation space, such that we'll be able to have a large keynote area for everyone. We're looking at around 100 to 115 in-person opportunities, as well as Zoom. And then there will be 3 areas for concurrent presentations. We are accepting ideas and recommendations for presentations, 10 to 20 minutes, 15 to 35 minutes, whatever. Anything that has to do with land and water conservation, habitats, fisheries, that type of thing in the Rappahannock River watershed that folks like me and all of our colleagues, as well as non-professionals, the master naturalists, master gardeners, students, may have an interest in. I know we do this every day, and but folks in the headwaters may not know everything that's going on down in the northern neck and middle peninsula, and vice versa. And there's research out there on fish species I didn't even know were in the river that I find interesting. So we have an okay small list to work off of for approaching people for presentations. Some are academic researchers from Virginia Tech or Smithsonian Environmental Research Center. Some are on this call and I haven't tapped them yet, or maybe they will be soon. The Roundtable is not an advocacy organization, aside from wanting clean water and positive habitats. And but so we're not doing any advocacy type presentations. And we do want the presentations to be efficacious. So good data. And if there's call to actions or available programs, we want that as well. And again, September 8th, we hope that everyone will participate, share with your networks. I've sent Eldon the save the date via email. It's on the Roundtable's Facebook page. If you have any specific questions, ideas, desires that we could incorporate into that to make it more attractive to your network, your locality, or anything like that, or topics that are like super hot button that you want to maybe have a discuss, please let me know. And we have worked in the past to have some of the presentations or workshops we facilitated provide continuing education credits, whether certainly for things like the Chesapeake Bay landscape professionals and some of the DEQ stormwater certifications. I don't know if it will meet the requirements for PEs or things like that, but Denise, if you have information on some of the things you'd like to see, like where I submit an abstract or something to get approval for those, I'd love to have that available. All right.
All right, Brian, I can help you with AICP.
That would be great.
So
I have submitted a request in conjunction with the communications director for the Department of Forestry to ask Secretary Bettina Ring to give us 5 or 10 minutes as a keynote. If anybody has a relationship with her or more importantly, the person who makes her schedule, she's our first choice since the workshop or the symposium is primarily funded through Department of Forestry. And if there's anybody else, state conservationist, Dr. Martinez, another great option. But yeah, and as we evolve, I'm going to keep Eldon and the rest of the Rappahannock Roundtable Advisory Group in the loop and continue to seek feedback and support from that body. But again, let me know if you have ideas, recommendations. Love to have as much feedback as possible.
Brian, you mentioned Zoom, and are you planning on having virtual access for your general sessions as well as your concurrent?
So
that's
right now,
technologically challenging to do that. I know.
Absolutely. We have engaged the services of Greenfin Studio, who have successfully facilitated some big time virtual workshops for the Chesapeake Bay program, among others. And they're working on that with us. We had originally planned on doing this at Old Mill Park under their existing pavilions with no Wi-Fi and questionable electricity access. And they looked at me like, say what? It turned out a bunch of soccer practices at 5 p.m. at that location forced us into a different venue, which has turned out to be making lives a lot easier. So whether it's live stream, interactive, or a recorded and available post, but we're hoping for the concurrent sessions to be kind of like a Zoom breakout room where you request which room you want to go to, and you can see the presentation on anadromous fishes from Department of Wildlife Resources, or you can pop over and hear about maximizing urban tree canopy for stormwater management or something like that. Hopefully you don't get stuck listening to me talk.
All right. Questions or comments? Okay, I hope everybody has that date saved on their calendar. And I'm showing it on this technical committee's calendar list. I don't know that we'll have a meeting, but we're encouraging everybody who regularly participates in this group to be part of this. There'll be some wonderful educational opportunities and networking opportunities, something that we've all had, we've all been hampered at trying to do over the last almost 2 years now. Anything else before I jump to VDEM? And who knows, VDEM may want to do a breakout on September 8th. With that, Ed, Pointer with VDEM, I'm going to hand off to you and tease us a little bit about restarting a project that has probably restarted more times than I even know how to count. So
Yeah, I tell you what, Eldon, this is long in the tooth. And just to give you a little history for those of you that might have joined us late, the Rappahannock River Basin project that we've been looking at, I think it had its inception 8 years ago, if I believe right. And there was a number of localities that put money into the system with some state matching funds in order to come up with a gauge network within the Rappahannock River Basin that primarily would address public safety issues, but also have the ability to expand further into the ability to increase sensor for stuff like water safety, turbidity, that kind of thing. Because of COVID, and I apologize for not having jumped on these for it's almost been a year and a half, almost 2 years. Jesus. We've been a little bit distracted, but we want to get re-engaged with this. Last time we left it, there was a company named Progeny, which was a DHS sponsored small business that was prototyping these sensors to put in the water, and which we were getting for free, and our only skin in the game at that point was maintenance. Progeny has since fallen out of favor. We are now gone to a company named IntelliSense, which DHS has contracted with them, and this is all through the Center for Innovative Technology, who is brokering this deal between the federal government and the state. As it happens, individual localities have put some of these in the water already, to include Roanoke, Ashland, and Fredericksburg. I believe that there's 7 now currently operating. They feed into a system, and bear with me on this one, they feed into a system called VA Fix, which is a drone management system that is a pilot program with the state to figure out drone airspace analysis and aircraft deconfliction. It's a completely, when I heard that, it was like, okay, what's going on here? But it was because CIT couldn't find another viable platform to put this in. This is just kind of a test of concept for those sensors themselves. It seems to be working fairly well. We can put this data through any type of mechanism that we'd like. So, and that's why VDEM's involved, for just philosophically to fill you in. We also manage a system called iFlows, which is the integrated flood. Oh shoot, I forget. I'm sorry, the acronym's escaping me, but it's a system of about 300 sensors throughout the state that both do stream gauges and weather gauges and rain gauges, and report into a central system. My overall view or hope the overall point in all this is to try to integrate everything that produces data into one central point of consumption. So whether it's a mesonet, for those of you that have heard of that term, whether it's a COP, which is a common operating picture, which would incorporate flooding data, which incorporates stream gauge data, maybe turbidity, maybe water quality, all these other data streams that are currently out there in their own little silos, to bring them back together into one place that we could have a one-stop shop. Right now we are kind of at a stop because they're having some issues, just like everything, because there's so many cars parked without chips. We've got 27 of these sensors destined for RRBC that are without chips as well. So we're thinking somewhere in August or so, we'll be able to get these back up and running. And we'll be looking to the localities to where those locations should be, based on your own historical data and where you'd like them to be. And by the way, let me just, if I'm remiss if I'm not introducing Peter Corrigan, who's also on the call. Pete is an ex-National Weather Service hydrologist that just came on board with us with iFlows. He's got 35 years of experience, retired from Blacksburg, and he's just been a tremendous help and just a wealth of information on how we start modernizing and implementing this going down to the future. So That's just my 2-minute elevator speech. And thanks for the attention. I'll be giving a more extensive brief on both iFlows and the RRBC project as we go further it's August, right, for the full meeting, Eldon?
Let me get off mute. We're going to dedicate a substantial portion of the technical committee meeting on August 18th to give you time to, kind of bring us all up to speed to where you are, and talk in more detail, discussions of locations, potential locations on those 27 sensors. Tell us a little bit about the Fredericksburg ones that have been put in place. If there's an opportunity to demonstrate something, that would be great. An integrated flood observing and warning system, iFlows.
There you go. Thank
Sorry
you,
to
sir.
do that to you.
No, and by the way, Pete was one of the primary drivers to iFlows in the beginning, so he's got quite the wealth of information. And Pete, do you have anything to add? Did I step on myself at all there?
Not really, Ed. Sorry I got on late here. Yeah, I don't really have too much to add, Ed. I think there's a lot of oars in the water right now with respect to trying to, we have an existing system, iFlows, which has been kind of creaking along, and trying to keep that working is a big challenge, while at the same time we attempt to potentially modernize the system through some of the things Ed referred to. So we're trying to do a couple things at the same time. It's a big challenge. That's a large network, and it's sort of been ignored a little bit. It was a weather service program originally, way back when, even before I got in the National Weather Service. It was 1980s,
Right.
Mid 80s, and so iFlows was a weather service program, was handed off to the states throughout the Appalachian region. 6 or 7 states at least had iFlows systems, and in most of those states, it's kind of gone into a bit of disrepair. The states haven't really been able to figure out how to operate it very efficiently. It falls into a VDEM mission. It also falls into other state mission, descriptions of what other state agencies do as well. So it's not really clear even if the state knows where it thinks iFlows belongs. It has always been an emergency management, but emergency management is not a science agency. It never really has been. It's a response agency. And there are more sciencey agencies in Virginia, DCR for one. And they have a lot of responsibility for dam safety and things like that, floodplain management as well. So a lot of moving parts with respect to how the state wants to handle this thing. It's got money allocated for it from the General Assembly, but how that is best spent is the big question. But the Rappahannock River Basin project is tied to that in the sense that, we're trying these new pathways and new methods of new sensors and possible new data pathways to get the information out to who needs it. So that's all I got.
Pete,
Thank you, sir.
it's a pleasure to meet you, and we look forward to working with you and what you're going to bring to this as we go forward. I'm sorry, Ed, I didn't mean to step on you.
No, good to go, Eldon. We'd be happy to entertain any questions if anybody has any.
With the understanding that you're developing your level of detail, and so with there's some folks, Ed, that are on this that can be resourced to you in the middle and upper basin, and so feel free, especially as you're talking about locations. I know you're plugged in with all the emergency managers, but the folks with the Friends of the Rappahannock have quite their own network, including property owners in the upper basin. So feel free to call on Brian and his folks if you need to have some location discussions. And I'm not volunteering Brian for anything new, because he's offered on multiple occasions.
We actually had some good success working with some of the roundtable partners up there in identifying sites for temperature logger installation for the Smithsonian Environmental Research Center. And, site access was easy. So yeah, just let us know. And the roundtable just has a direct pipeline to a lot of different organizations, which has its own networks that are all at your disposal.
Thanks, Brian. I really appreciate the offer, and we're definitely going to reach out to you. And also, there is a definite nexus between DCR and DEQ. Part of the want, and just to give you a little bit of behind the curtain, we're getting $1 million a year for the next 5 years to be able to upgrade this iFlow system in general. But I see it as more of a holistic view of things, because we don't have a good idea of what sensors are out there from every different agency, what they feed into. And I think that's kind of our first order of business is how do we agglomerate all that to something a lot more useful than just having some one website somewhere that 5 people are looking at. So,
and in previous discussions, you mentioned that all the gauges and stuff, if you guys are already putting in this expensive infrastructure with Wi-Fi or radio signal, and the presentation from one of the probe manufacturers said there's other ports. Well, can DEQ scrape together some money for a dissolved oxygen probe? Is there a temperature logger and a flow meter from USGS that can be incorporated in? If somebody's already excavating the site, installing all of that, and making sure it can talk to a website, how many other people want to strap something on there? And yeah, so we definitely want to see if that's can be maximized as well.
the problem is, Brian, it's not so much strapping it on there initially, it's who's going to maintain it. And that's kind of our Achilles heel in all this. We've got one contractor that's out there that tends to be hit and miss, and just because of the amount of money that we can throw at it, which is minuscule. We're looking at some different ways to do that, whether it's localities do some of the basic maintenance, and then the harder stuff is done by contract. But we'll lay all that out there in August and see if we can put our heads together.
I was going to say that as a member of the technical advisory committee to the creation of the resilience master plan, the statewide resilience master plan, there's been a lot of discussion about data-driven approaches to flooding resiliency, specifically around Atlas 14 and updating that. But there's no better information than on-the-ground data, and so I think through that process, that should be identified as a primary goal and objective of the master plan, is to develop a statewide network of gauges, both rainfall gauges, riverine gauges, you name it. So I mean, I kind of look to North Carolina and the system that they have set up as an example.
Yeah, that's kind of the gold standard for things. Unfortunately, they paid for that after an enormous storm that kind of that decimated them and caught them unprepared. We don't want to be that same state. Just a question: what's Atlas 14? That's the first time I've heard of that. And also, you're exactly right on the more people that we get to have skin in the game in this, whether it's coastal flooding, whether it's erosion, that kind of thing, and come up with a bigger scheme than just these bifurcated lanes, I think would be a lot more successful.
There's got to be somebody smarter than me on here that knows about Atlas 14.
I can speak to no Atlas 14. I worked actually at Weather Service headquarters on that years ago. That is the precipitation frequency data that the Weather Service headquarters, used to be Office of Hydrology, put together for basically design 10-year rainfall, two-year through 500-year rainfall. So no Atlas 14, and Virginia is in the process of trying to get that updated. It's kind of different states do it at different times. It's always been a bit of a struggle to get, again, it's a funding issue sometimes, but Virginia is in the process of getting no Atlas 14 updated for Virginia. And that's a huge, what is the 10-year rainfall for a particular, for basins and for point rainfall as well. So when you talk about any type of construction, culvert, roof construction, gutters, anything. It's all based on NOAA's 14 data. So it really is, it's the design basis for rainfall.
Yeah, and Ed, what you're kind of describing here is a lack of continuity at the upper echelons of state government to address this issue. And it seems to me that the master planning process and the chief resilience officer, who's currently the Secretary of Natural Resources, is the way to get that attention.
We're putting together, it's kind of through the, I don't know if anybody has heard of the chief of innovative technology. It's a guy named Tony Wood. It works through VITA. And he's the one that is going to start, he's getting an agglomeration of all these agencies together, hopefully some people that can make decisions or at least point us in the right direction, to get this a lot more attention than it has been in the past. And you're exactly right in that the decision makers need to make this a priority, or at least have more visibility on it than this just separate way that we've been doing this in the past. So more on that. We'll definitely keep everybody involved and informed.
I think before the administration's out, reaching out to Rear Admiral Phillips, Ann Phillips, who's the
Yeah, I've talked to her at length.
Okay, great, excellent.
I believe one of the major first uses of flood fund money is going to be trying to fund a statewide system of river gauges, coastal tidal gauges as well. So that's one of the main priorities for some of that first allocation of money, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, there was a discussion, Brent, but I don't, I've made the case that some of that money should be used by DCR and the state of Virginia to do things just like this, but we'll see where that goes.
Because I know they took out loans to pay for 4 staffers as well as other things. And so it's, the precedent is there if they wanted to take out money to do something like this before, against the fund to pay it back later, that they already received that ability to do so in the last session.
This is a new one to me. What is that money?
Yeah, I was gonna ask the same question. I don't understand.
That's the Community Flood Preparedness Fund. That was the guidelines were just released for. That's set up. It's administered by DCR and the Virginia Resources Authority, and it was set up by the Secretary of Natural Resources. It's utilizing the money from Virginia's participation in the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, and 45% of those monies is going towards this fund, minus some administrative costs to VRA and DCR. And currently they have a grant request for applications out due September 3rd for $18 million. And that was just the first quarter of auctions. There's already been another quarter of auctions. I think it was upwards of $25 million, I believe it was. They're looking at about $80 million this year in the first 4 quarters of that auction with Reggie.
And they actually mentioned they actually mentioned a statewide stream gauging network.
There was I recall it's been mentioned, but there was no detailed discussion on it. What was your question, Ed?
Is that targeted towards private entities? Something like
targeted towards local. That's targeted towards subdivisions of the state of Virginia. So localities, PDCs.
Interesting.
I told you about that, Ed. And Reggie, it's a huge pot of money.
Yeah, and it's not tied to budget at all. So it doesn't have to be allocated every year, and it rolls over every year.
Huh. Somebody mentioned brick grants too. That's something that we're looking at closely. That's something that we can leverage with a little homework.
You very easily. I think the Flood Preparedness Fund is a perfect match for brick funds.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Okay.
Anyway,
Great.
we might need to have a separate brainstorming session, Eldon, about this.
No, this is good. Just this will be the main agenda item. Well, we've got two. Plan on our August 18 meeting being the full 2 hours like we used to do back when we met in person. We're still going to be virtual though. We got a presentation on the wastewater infrastructure policy working group that is dealing with the septic issues. This is the health department. This is what Delegate Ranson brought up at the commission meeting and asked us specifically to get a briefing on. And then so half the meeting will be that, and the other half, probably the bigger half, if there's any such thing, will be this very discussion. So stay tuned on that. And that will be a run up to the September 22 meeting of the commission in Madison County at Graves Mountain Lodge. The meeting that didn't occur last September. And we'll be looking for Ed and Pete and the team to have a discussion with the commission. And I think there's some very important points that have been made here today that need to be said in front of the group of elected officials who will be in that room that day. Some of which at the state level and then a bunch at the local level. The need for leadership and coordination, those are policy issues, and that's the policy group. So anyway, with that, other comments, questions for Ed or Pete? And
Eldon, this is Michelle Edwards. I think I got confused somewhere along the line in all this. Are we still talking about the same river gauges that the localities in the upper basin had put money to
yes,
years and years and years ago? Okay, so I just wanted to make sure
that would have been 2015, 2016.
Yeah,
when he was
so
assembled. Yes.
I'm assuming that we're talking about determining where they should go because the eye flows and the gauges themselves have changed so much over the years. But is there any possibility of using the locations that were already put forward to some degree and just looking at whether they're still applicable? Because I really hate to go back to our emergency managers a third time. I think most of them are still the same folks, and I think they're going to be very irritated with me if I go back and make them meet again to have the same discussion. And
before Ed responds to that, Michelle, let me say this, and then Ed can tell me what I got wrong. Ed's team, Mark Stone primarily, they've already been engaged with your emergency managers directly.
Okay.
And you're not going to have to worry about taking the shots going back.
Thank you.
Those discussions are already hard at work. So I'm not worried about that issue. Ed,
great.
I don't know if I got that wrong.
No, that's absolutely correct. So we'll be using those same locations that the individual EMs have had. Mark is re-engaging them now and letting them know that we're hopefully getting to the home stretch of this, and we will, we'll use the same locations. So no need to fall on our face with it.
Okay, thank you.
Great question, Michelle.
I just want to make sure their time is valuable and that I'm not just going to them again for the same thing. Yes, thank you.
Understood. I've got some elected officials who feel the same way, Michelle. Other comments, questions? Ed, thank you very much. Pete, it's great to meet you. Look forward to working with you. And with that, everybody's got the agenda. You see the upcoming meetings. We've talked about that quite a bit. As we get out to October, we'll be bringing VIMs in. As I mentioned, we'll be talking about the wastewater infrastructure policy working group from the VDH perspective in August. We're going to be talking about the same thing, but from the VIMS perspective in October. and some exciting stuff going on there. And with that, any other comments, information? I see Department of Forestry and DEQ turning on their cameras. Anything, either of Brian Mays, you want to add something?
Sure. I just want to mention that one of our grants that I think has kind of been brought up a few times is available again this summer. The Urban and Community Forestry grant program is open now through August 20th, I believe it is, and I can put the full information on that grant in the chat. We'll share it by email or do both, and that can really help fund a lot of different projects, whether planning, workforce development, education, even building up local urban forestry programs. So hopefully can support a lot of the things that this group is talking about today. And it's really available to any kind of group, whether it's a nonprofit group, a locality. It's pretty easy to apply for. And if there's any questions locally, I'd be happy to try to answer those as you look through this, the RFP. Or Laura Johnson is our Urban and Community Forestry Program Manager at Porter, so she could answer those questions as well. So just want to make sure everyone was aware of that. I think that gets shared by email pretty well, but anyway. And then I know that the shortage of seedlings was talked about a little bit early on. And so I think we did receive a little funding this year from the General Assembly to expand our nursery out in Crymore, or the Augusta Forestry Center. So I think we're going to bump our production area up from 18 acres to 25 acres over time. So small improvement, but we are trying. Still waiting to hear if potentially we'll be able to reopen the nursery at New Kent, but I guess that time will tell on that. A lot of work to do there, but I know when we were talking about the raft process out on the Northern Neck, a few of the small communities like Colonial Beach had mentioned the idea of establishing real small nurseries where they basically just replant bare root seedlings so they could grow them for their residents. If that's something that communities are interested in or want to try a small pilot project, the grant that I'm going to send out, that may be a way to explore that opportunity. But we're certainly open to sharing more information or trying to help if any community has that idea as well. So thanks, Eldon.
Thank you, Brian.
Yeah, Eldon, I just put my camera on so I could wave goodbye, but then I thought of something I should bring up. And that is that the annual Section 319 Clean Water Act non-point source grant request for applications is out on the street now. A couple of changes for implementation plan watersheds that have current grants. They don't need to respond to the RFA to request a continuation of the grant support. So Culpeper, for example, Culpeper Soil and Water Conservation District has several ongoing grants, and they will not be responding to ask for an additional grant there. But the other change is that DEQ had a practice of closing out, that was the term, closed IP watersheds in the past, and that was after either there had been some grants issued and, the work that seemed possible at the time was completed, or, the IP was completed and there simply wasn't interest for some period of time. And so DEQ closed those IP watersheds. Well, that policy has now been revisited, and basically any implementation plan project area that has been approved by EPA is eligible to apply for additional or new grant assistance. So I just wanted to mention that. If you have any questions about it, anybody, let me know. And then finally, there is a webinar for anyone interested to learn about DEQ's non-point source request for applications, kind of a how-to guide. That's the intention of it. That's tomorrow. 9:30 till noon. I don't know if it'll take all that time, but tomorrow at 9:30 is a webinar.
Very good. Thank you, Dave.
Hey, good morning. This is Ed Pointer from VDM.
Yep.
Excellent.
Hey, Ed, I think, yeah.
They got it.
To follow up on Bryant's discussion about expanding nursery capacity, for the past 3 months, we've been working with Culpeper County and Virginia Cooperative Extension and some other folks to found a conservation nursery in Culpeper designed to meet the growing needs of our reforestation programs and the partners that are engaged in reforestation and some of the green infrastructure, such that the roundtable partners, counties, NGOs, agencies, HOAs, that kind of thing, that have viable green infrastructure projects would have access to plant material at or below wholesale, or in a lot of cases when there's additional grants, free. Right now, we've got more projects than we have grant funds. For the last 2 years, I think we've worked with Bryant or one of his counterparts to aggregate localities or small applicants together who can't foot the upfront bill, don't have the ability to sign a contract with the state agency. It's essentially a federal grant, though. And we've packaged 3 or 4 projects with 3 or 4 sub applicants together. And we basically provide a loan for all that project work for a year, and then get reimbursed at the end. And that's been great. And having this nursery would further enable us to support that type of project work by providing in-kind donations of plant material as well as technical assistance. And we presented to the Culpeper County Buildings and Grounds Committee last week and got the thumbs up to provide them final site plan and design for that. And we're hoping in year 1 to have 5,000 stems and kind of get to the capacity of 20,000, which is nothing when you look at Department of Forestry's nursery having 20,000 of one species some years. But every little thing chips away.
Thank you, Brian. Other comments for the
Eldon, this is Michelle Edwards. Just to note that we will be having our Upper Basin Land Use and Environment Committee meeting on the 19th of August at 10 o'clock. And we're going to we've invited DEQ to come and speak about solar as it relates to stormwater management. So that will be the big topic for that meeting, in addition to our ongoing discussion of the Upper Rappahannock Watershed Plan and the tool for that.
Thank you for that, Michelle. Okay, anything else, folks? Thank you, everybody, for participating. Good information. We've got stuff coming up, and we will see everybody in August, and make sure you got September 8th on your calendars. Have a great day, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Eldon.